G'day, hi, and welcome. Alright, this is going to be a completely different video than probably most of my audience ever used to seeing. And you're probably going to see a bit of a truck theme in this because I'm on a bit of a truck kick right now. But I started, just so you can get an idea of where I'm coming from. I'm a man that's 44, 45 years old, am I? But I'm old enough that I forget how old I am. And when I was a kid, I mean, we didn't have a lot of video games and stuff like that we used. There was arcades. Arcades were fun. They were very social. You went there with your friends and your quarters, and you maybe spent a buck 25, and if you were really good, you could make that buck 25 last about an hour if you could get to the max levels and then start over again, right? But you'd eventually screw up and you'd, lose out. So that's what you did. The next thing you did is you ran around. If you weren't picking your nose, you're on your bicycle with a deck of cards and a clothespin, and you would be basically annoying the crap out of the neighborhood, riding around with your friends, screaming and yelling, while the parents would always say, "You kids get outside and play. Go scream, yell, make all the noise you want. Just get outside and play." And you get outside and you'd hear them yelling out the window, "Will you guys keep it down?" And then there were the rainy days. What did a kid back in the 1970s, 1980s do on the rainy days? Well, you built things. You have to understand, scale modeling is something that guys my age, when we were kids, this was our Game Boy. This was our Xbox. This is what we did for fun. But it did more than what you would possibly ever imagine, because I started off more of an aviation buff than anything. So my very first scale model, believe it or not, back in 1979 or probably 1980, maybe 81 at the most, was out in Lethbridge, Alberta, when my dad was working on the pipeline. There was this little corner store. It was kind of like an everything store, and off in the far corner of the store, they had a few scale models there. They had about 3 or 4, and they had some little tester paints. They were cheap and everything like that. And I had just seen this movie called 1941, and if you ever seen it with John Belushi, it's a comedic take on World War II type of thing. And I saw this airplane in there, and I fell in love with it, pretty much like every kid would. One of the most probably known airplanes out of World War II, and that was the P-40 Warhawk. There was the Warhawk, the Tomahawk, the Kitty Hawk. There was several versions of the P-40. And in fact, I would later on go into the museum and spend many of my lunch hours sitting in a P-40D that was sitting in the museum. And that specific airplane, was used as a training airplane near the end of World War II for the Canadian RCAF. They would use P-40s in Nova Scotia. They would fly them out of Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and stuff like that, and train with them. Then they'd go on to the Hurricanes and the Spitfires, right? But anyway, long story short, I saw the shark tooth, really angry-looking warbird, and it had a little sexy little girl with angel wings and devil's tail and whatever, and it was the Hell's Angel Squadron. The history of the Hell's Angels go back to basically Charles Chenault, I think it was his name, was the squadron leader, and I think he died in 1986 or whatever. But anyway, the P-40 would be one of the first model airplanes I would ever build. I probably built literally about 10 P-40 airplanes. I just loved them. But it fascinated me because I learned a lot about airplanes through starting scale modeling. And then I don't know which model I did first, but I bought 2 models. I hounded my mom and dad to give me the $5 or $10 it was for these 2 models. And of course I had to hound them again because it's like, wow, I need the paints too. And it was also the first models that I ever not only put together, but the first models I ever painted. So the only model I actually painted was the P-40. But the other model was a snap-together model. It was just a tiny little model. I think I bought them about a week apart. And I don't remember which one I bought first. The P-40 actually, for a kid that was like 9 years old, I didn't do too bad. I mean, I made a few mistakes with it, you could say. I mean, some things were crooked. And yeah, I ended up with fingerprints all over it. You would have, like you would expect a kid to do for their very first scale model. But I finished the thing. I did it all myself. But my second model was a snap together. It was a very small model. It was the Cheech and Chong van. Yeah, I remember this thing. I remember this. I can even smell the paint from it right now, just describing it. It's just such a fond memory, but it's a great memory because that snap together. I took it apart and put it back together probably 100 times. Just I'd get bored. I'd take it apart and put it back together. Take it apart. Try to take it apart without breaking it, because some of these snap-togethers you only put them together once, and that's it, right? But I did that. And I don't know what happened to these things. I probably played with them and broke them because to a kid, the concept of a kid building a model and then just putting it on the shelf and looking at it, that was that was sacrilege. No, you played with the thing, put your fingerprints all over it, bust it, try to make it see if it actually would fly. None of the P-40s I ever tried to make fly would fly. I actually put a rocket engine on one of the P-40s. It was the funniest thing I ever seen. It climbed like a homesick angel, but it crashed pretty hard. Yeah, we lost a prop on that one. But then you start to learn, why won't this airplane fly? And then you start learning about mechanical engineering, weight and balance. Weight over the wings is fine. Weight over the tail, not so fine, right? That type of thing. But anyway, my cousin he was a lot older than me. By a lot older, he was like 4 or 5, well, maybe 6 or 7 years older than me. And he had like model trucks and model airplanes and model cars, and they were really, really nice. He did really, really good jobs on them. And I remember I used to just stare at these things. I was like, wow, they're so neat. They're so cool. I'm going to build one of those. I would never recommend, especially if you got like small kids and you really want to get them into something and you don't want them playing video games all day, get them a very simple, especially if they're really young, say like 5, so 4, 5, whatever. If you can keep their attention long, get a snap together model, less than 10 pieces if you can find. Something that you could build within 15, 20 minutes. But get them to build it so that they start to learn mechanical reasons. And then let them play with it and bust it and whatever. So I started buying model airplanes pretty much from that time on, 9, 10 years old. And I wouldn't usually have the money to paint a lot of them, so I'd put them together, but I wouldn't have the money to paint them. And then what I would do is, later on I would get into a little bit of airbrushing and stuff like that. By the time I got into the airbrushing angle of it, I was now in my 20s, so it's like, okay, well, this is, I kind of outgrew it. But it was always fun and interesting to do. People look at scale modeling as a kid's thing, but it's not. It's a really serious thing, because to make anything look good, you really have to have a lot of skills. But you can't put things together without learning how things work. And this is why I would highly suggest, if you have children that you want them to learn mechanical reasoning, start them on the snap togethers, and then once they say do 3 or 4 snap togethers and they get the concept and they start to get the taste for it. I mean, you can't force them to do it, but if they like to do it, then maybe what you do, and don't be surprised when everything they make looks horrible, but just encourage them to keep doing it, because if you critique it too much, they're just going to lose interest. So anyway, I started building like World War II. I built a B-24 Liberator. That was the biggest bomber aircraft that I made. It was a 1/48 scale. I mostly worked with 1/48 scale stuff, but I built everything. I built a Comet. I built several cars. My 53 Corvette, that one kind of and you learn things when you build things. I used to use, because I painted stuff when I got my airbrush, I still had some old model cars sitting around. Some of them I gave away to smaller kids and my cousins and stuff like that, my brother, because he was younger than me. And then some of them I wanted to redo again. I wanted to redo the 53 Vet. And I had learned the trick of taking off the tester paint, the oil-based paint, with gasoline. And this actually worked pretty good. I did a couple of cars that way and I was able to do it. But so one day I thought, well, why don't I just dunk the whole chassis and car in the thing, and I'll, because I took my time taking this 53 Vet. I can't remember. I think it was a Revel kit. And I took it apart, and I had just the body work, and I was like, okay, I'm going to take all the paint off, and I left it in a coffee tin for half an hour. I came back and I pulled it out, and it just pulled out as a big goop of slime because the fuel actually melted the plastic. So so that one failed miserably. But I remember the corner store guy here in my little town, he would get these models in. I built a 747. I built a 66 Malibu. That one I never got to paint. I always imagined that one in a nice candy apple red. It would have looked really good. And then I kind of gave up on the cars, and I was just completely into warbirds, and I did everything. Then I started getting into the Hobbycraft kits, which Hobbycraft Canada obviously is Canadian made, and the thing about those was that they were cheaper, but they also had a lot of Canadiana to them. So I got the Abrero. I still yet to build that one. I've got 2 CF100s. I still got those 2 model kits, but I had probably about 10 or 12 model kits that I just ended up. I had an F4 Phantom. I gave it to my brother for it was 1/48 scale as well. I gave that to my brother for Christmas of 1 year. I did this Cooters tow truck years ago as well. I think that was one of the. I did that one pretty good to say it was hand painted. I think I might have done a General Lee as well. I had like a whole bunch of General Lees of all scale sizes and stuff like that. But I mainly worked with aircraft. And once I started getting good with the airbrusher, good enough to actually start making things look good, I kind of got out of it. And I gave a lot of the models away. But I remember when I tried to get my brother into it, what I did was... I also did the 18 band coming up here. I didn't get to paint this one, but I did a good job on that one when I did it. That's not mine, but that's the exact kit I had too. I did really good with that one. I never bought that model kit. I always wanted to. That was a very famous model kit. That's the actual full thing, but you get the idea. But anyway, I got my brother into it. I remember the first airplane I bought for him was a Harrier, an AV-8A. And he put it together, and of course, he was fairly young. He might have been about 10 or 12 years old. And of course, he worked on it. He didn't paint it or anything. And it was actually a pretty big project for somebody building a model for the first time. I mean, we're probably talking about 50 or 60 pieces to this thing, maybe 100. But he built it as I was building mine. And he basically, in a nutshell, he finished the whole thing, and he could just see the accomplishment in his face. Hey, look what I did! And like the tail's the landing gear's a bit crooked. There's fingerprints on the canopy, because he had glue on his hands, that type of thing, and everything's kind of, it's all there, but it's a little bit out, right? So he built a few. He did that. He did an A10, and I'd kind of help him out a bit with it. Then I did one day. I did the fastest model I ever built was a 1/48 scale Mitsubishi Zero. I did this whole thing in like 8 hours. Mind you, I painted everything, and I had some really good tester paint that you could brush on, and it was self-leveling. It was almost as nice, believe it or not, for a brush on it was almost as nice as as an airbrush. I was very surprised how good this stuff was. But it was like $3. This is back in the 90s. It was like $3 for the paint. It was more than those little square testers. It was the pro stuff, right? And I did some Spitfires with it. I had a Mark. What Spitfires did I do? I did Spitfire 4, Spitfire 14, 15, Spitfire. I don't think I did Spitfire 9. But I did a Hawker Hurricane. And I tried to make the Hawker Hurricane as close to the one at the National Aviation Museum in Ottawa because I used to work there. And so I did all those. As far as ships, I did. I would never start somebody off on ships. Although I do remember, yes, I did do a small scale ship snapped together years ago. It was a pirate ship of some sort when I was a little kid. Maybe I was about 5. Maybe that was the first one I ever put together. I don't know. I mean, we're talking a long time ago. Again, I have a hard time remembering how old I am, let alone what my first kit model was. But I remember enjoying it. I just remember enjoying it so much. But I also remember when I did the first Jolly Roger. I forget who made that kit. They still make it. They did the Captain Kidd, the Jolly Roger, and stuff like that. That model, even though it was a plastic model, it took me a long time to do that model. And I used to buy modeling magazines, and you get some tips and tricks on there. One of the things I used to do was use Kleenex, brush on Kleenex over the plastic sails to give a more fabric look to it. And it worked pretty good. It took a couple of tries to get it right, but it looked pretty good. It gave it a, you know, you could see the weave in it and stuff like that. And it was one of those things. But that model took me forever. It had 15 cannons on it or something like that. It was, you know, it was a fair size. I think the whole model was probably about 20 inches. It was probably close to 2 feet long, probably 18, 20 inches long, you know. And then of course it had 3 masts and all that. And that thing, the wire rigging on it was just like thread, but to get it, oh my God, it just took forever. I gave up after a while because I just, you know, I said, okay, well, you know, when do you say when? You know, like it's kind of one of those kits you could just put as much effort into it as you want, and you could just keep adding things onto it. That, you know, like I say, because it was thread wiring, you had the option of just keep, you know, if you wanted to just put the plastic parts together, that was one thing. But if you wanted to thread everything together to make it look like the rigging, the original rigging, well, the sky was the limit there. I mean, you could spend hundreds of hours doing this. Obviously not a model you'd want to start on. Shipbuilding is, I think, that's like expert class, especially when you look at the wood builders. I mean, those are just pretty. That'd be a nightmare for somebody. It'd be very overwhelming. If you don't know what I mean, buy yourself a Gallows kit aircraft. If you get I did a Hellcat in the Gallows kit, and that took me forever. And that, you know, it was definitely a challenge. It was like building a real aircraft, but you know, it was only, I forget what the scale was. It was like 16th or something like that, 1/16 or 1/32 scale, whatever size it was. But it was a, you know, a free flight model or whatever, and I did a couple of those too. I also did a couple of remote control airplane, or a remote control airplane kits, and I started getting out of the plastic model kits and into those, and then after, you know, I was just too busy and I gave up on it altogether. But you know, I'd like to get back into it again. But now, you know, last time I went into a hobby shop was last year, and when I went into the hobby shop, one thing I noticed was the price difference of everything. Tester paints are no longer like you know, 50 cents, 25 cents, 75 cents. They're now like $2 to God knows what. So you really got to shop around. So some of the things you can do is, number one, hit up yard sales. Sometimes you get some of these old, you know, model kits that are half finished or not finished at all. And I used to get kits like that. Some of my friends, they'd start them, they'd get frustrated, and they would give me, they said, Reg, this model's just, you know, this is like expert class. I don't have, you know, like there's 175 parts to this thing. I don't have the time to build it. Did you want it? I got this far done on it. So I'd usually take what they did, undo it, and then rebuild the whole thing again myself. And just because I like doing it. And you take your time to do it. Sometimes it takes you a month to finish. You know, you do like a little bit at a time, let stuff dry. A little more at a time, let stuff dry. And it was something to do on your off time, right? In fact, when I worked security, I used to sneak some of them in there and just do you know, little bit parts. You know, wasn't really supposed to be doing that at work, but you know, it was like the graveyard shift, right? So I was like, okay, well, I'll build some model airplanes while I'm at the graveyard shift. And it's like, okay, well, it's something to do, right? So the dispatch would come around. So what are you doing? Is it building a Fokker 190? I was like, oh, okay. Well, are you paying attention to what you're doing? Oh, yeah, I saw you coming. Yeah, that everything. But the point is that you can find some of these model kits in the bargain bins and stuff like that. If you're really specific about what you're looking for, that's where it gets pricey, that type of thing. But you don't have to start off at the master class level either, and you don't always have to build large scale. In fact, the real challenge is the smaller the scale, the tougher it is to be more detailed. That I always found. Like 172 scale, I find is a kind of a tricky scale because you almost need that you know, you get into one of those ant suits to shrink yourself down so that everything's to scale, because you know, it's like, you know, to see the instrument panels, stuff like that, and try to paint the instrument panels and stuff. Very, very, very hard to get just the right amount of paint. You'll be painting with toothpicks and stuff like that, which keeps it very, very interesting. But it also makes it very, very challenging. So 172 scale's pretty good. I've always liked the 148 scale because I found it the easiest, and you had more detail to work with. Um, big stuff, like I say, the two biggest I did was the B-24 Liberator. The second biggest would be that ship, or the first biggest would have been the Jolly Roger. That was the biggest model I did and the most complicated. The other most complicated, there were some kits that I did that were actually really good, and they were really complicated. But most of the kits I always bought were usually the more inexpensive ones. You know, that type of thing. I did a P-51 Mustang. I did a couple of those as well. And they always, I had various different kits. I did some 1/3-2 scale stuff, P-47, the Focke-Wulf, or 1/24 scale. I can't remember what size they were. I think they were 1/3-2 scale, and stuff like that. And I started getting into the bigger, you know, the bigger scale stuff, because the detail was more, and they would take longer. They were a little harder to do, but they were also a lot more expensive. But you could get them for a reasonable price. But then what ended up happening is I had this gigantic aquarium. Well, not gigantic, but it was big enough, and I made that kind of my makeshift aviation museum. It was kind of weird. I had like 3 different floors in it, and you could walk around it. You could see all the airplanes. I had about 60 some odd airplanes in there. Ended up giving them all away to like my cousins and stuff like that were much younger, because I was like, well, what am I going to do with them? Once you build them, what do you do with them, right? And you can get to a point where you start tripping over these things. And when I look at the older one, like I know what I was able to do and what I was able to afford, but one of the things I used to do, and you will do this as a scaled model, you'll get way ahead of yourself. You'll start going out and buying kits, okay? And it's, oh, hey, I can't wait to build that kit. And you got 1 or maybe 2 of them on the go, and then, you know, like anything, I had an uncle that was like this too. He had a wall full of scale model kits that were not unbuilt. I think that's where I got my Cooter's tow truck from, was from him. And he gave me another one. It was of a El Camino or whatever. And I always wanted to hunt these kits down again to rebuild them again, but to build them as professionally this time around, right? But I would say buy yourself 1 kit, finish it, then buy another. I get it, if there's a good deal on something, you gotta take it. But again, I ended up getting rid of a whole bunch of really good kits that I just gave away, because it's like, I'm never going to finish them. I'm never going to get time to it. Like I say, I still have my Aero and my 2 CF100s. So for me to get back into it, well, I could start with the CF100s and the Aero and start with that, but it wouldn't take me long to put them together. But then to go out to buy all the paints I need, you know, I do have a very cheap airbrush. If you're just getting into it, the airbrush, the compressor, all that stuff it's too expensive for most people to do that. Start off with just, you know, paintbrushes. You know, just get used to building things. In fact, you don't even have to worry about paint for the first little bit. Get yourself a cheaper model, put it together. Just try to put the model together without leaving any glue residue, you know, visible. That'll be enough of a challenge for you to begin with. Then from there, if you want to do the whole thing, buy 1 model, okay, buy all the paints you're going to need. Get something that's going to be easy to put together. Not so much how many pieces, but just the skill level. Like maybe, you know, some of them have like a 1, 2, 3 skill level. Some things are like master class, beginner, whatever it is. But start off with something that's reasonable. You know, something that's going to keep you entertained, something that's going to keep you kind of focused on it, but not something that you're going to have finished. Like I say, the pirate ship, that took me a long time. If I was ever to work on another model ship again, I would make sure I didn't have any other models to work on whatsoever, and you'd really have to discipline yourself to work on it little bits at a time, because that is a big project. I mean, I don't know how many pieces were in that. It was probably nearly 175, 200 pieces to that kit. So, and to paint all of them and do all the detailing and all that stuff, it really does take a lot of time. But something easier, like say like a car, a simple car with just a handful of colors, not so much. You know, it doesn't really matter what kind of car it is, but you can get some of them, you know, okay, everything's matte black except for the, you know, the interior. You go gloss black, and then the exterior, you know, metallic blue, whatever, and then the rest is all whatever it is. So you can keep things simple and just get the practice of working with one color, two colors, and keep it cheap. And then if you, as long as, because you can make everything. For example, one of my friends, he did an interesting. He got a model, and it was the kit was red or it was gray or whatever, but he made everything, even all the little chrome bits. He painted the whole thing black. Everything in it was black, and he did it all flat black, and he did it all with a good paint. So he did basically, it was like $3 for the paint, and there was enough paint to do the entire car, and it looked really good. And the only things that weren't painted was basically like the windshield and the stuff like that, the windows and the headlights and the taillights. But the engine was all black, all the chrome bumpers and everything were repainted black. You could sort of see the chrome through the bumper, through the paint a little bit, but he did a really good job. But it was all self-leveling, everything like that, and then you put the decals on, and it looked like a pace car. It looked really good. And I can't remember what it was. It was some sort of, it might have been a Nova, it might have been something like that. But he did a really simple job, and it kept it cheap for him, and it looked really, really good. But what was really good about it is when you lifted the hood and all that stuff, and you looked at it, it looked real. Like it looked like a real thing. When you did the dash on the inside, it looked real. As real as you could get for a scale model, right? And he put a lot of time into it, but he kept it simple, right? So wherever you start on these things, you can get overwhelmed with them, and that's what makes people stop. So it's best to start off with something really simple. Snap-togethers are good for kids. If you are an adult, you're going to have to learn to play with the glue. It's one of those things that you can do, pretty much at any pace you want. But as soon as you finish it, like the goal when you're, especially for younger kids, is just to finish it, right? But when you get a little bit older, it's not about finishing it. It's about doing a really good product, making it look really, really good. And it's to the point now where scale modeling is it's probably not as popular as what it used to be. Hence why everything's probably so expensive now. But the people that do it now are very competitive about it. In other words, they use like real automotive paints and stuff like that. And like they'll spend like 100 hours on building a car to compete with, which is kind of a cool thing too. The other thing about it is that you're always going for personal best, so you're learning how to do a trick and a skill and stuff like that. Now the nice thing about the internet and videos like this is that right now I'm not showing you anything, but maybe if I do a scale model, maybe next time I'm out, I might pick up some paints or whatever, and I'll do the Avro, or I'll do the the Canucks, whichever, the Aero, the Canucks, because I still got them, and I always wanted to keep those kits just as kits, but I thought, well, why have them and not build them? You know what I mean? So that would be very, very cool, and I'll do like some of the detailing on that, and then you can see how I do it. And I like to keep the first few ones simple, but the hardest thing to do is not to make something look brand new. It's to make it look worn and used. That is where the skills really come in. That the guys that do dioramas and stuff like that, they get into such detail. It takes them like 6 months just to do a diorama. Some of them, it takes them longer, and some of the stuff out there is just incredible. It's just one of those things that you can take it to whatever level you want. Now, that said, like any hobby, it can get as expensive as you want as well. And I think that keeps people out of stuff. So I always say keep it simple, stupid, that type of thing. Spend your $25, get your model. If 25 is too much, go look at the bargain bin, find the cheap stuff. Maybe there's one for $5, maybe there's one for $2, maybe there's one for $10. Go get whatever you can get and get it as cheap as you can. And then let's say the models, let's say hypothetically a model of some sort of a muscle car is $10. Okay, if you can get one for $10, so they're regularly $25 or $35. You don't want to spend that much money on it, but there's one for $10. Okay, it needs 5 colors. Okay, fine, 5 colors, and then maybe you're going to get a little bit creative, and you might buy 6 or 7 colors. Okay, so you budget let's say you have 20 bucks, you spend 10 bucks on paints, and make sure you have a paintbrush, and then you spend 10 bucks on the model. Okay, you're 20 bucks in. If it sits there forever and you never finish it, no harm, no foul. But if you do spend like 35 bucks, 40 bucks, 60 bucks for the model kit, and you get the airbrush kit for 40 bucks, you get the compressor thing for 200. You see where I'm getting at, and then all the paints and everything. And then you got to get like a little mini spray booth and all that. Next thing you know, you're at $500, right? And you haven't built anything yet. So I would say don't go that route to begin with. See if you like doing it first, because that's the biggest thing. Like, I mean, for me, over my lifetime, I only built 60 models because I was too poor to build more. You know what I mean? And time is the big one. That's one of these hobby. That's one of the things about this type of hobby, is it requires an obscene amount of time. Again, my record time for a completely finished Mitsubishi Zero was that's maybe not full drying time, but almost all the drying time was 8 hours. Like that was very delicate working, because I was still working with soft paint and everything. But I got all the paints pretty much painted up, and then I put everything together, glued, painted everything that needed to be painted and whatever. It was fun. It was like, okay, that took me 8 hours. Very, very fun. But the thing about it is that did I do the absolute best I could do with that Zero? Actually, I did a pretty darn good job with that Zero, because my skill level was there. It was like I could do a good job in 8 hours, whereas normally I did like one of the P40s I spent a lot of time doing, and it looked good, but when I did the underbelly, it didn't look as good as the first one I did, because I had I was still doing everything painting by hand. But when I did my Spitfires, because the Spitfires, there was no gloss paint on them at all. They were just all done up in olive drab type drab type colors, drab gray, drab olive green, drab browns and stuff like that. Those ones, plus the paint I was using, was really good. The Spitfires, like, they looked really good from a distance. Then I started using the airbrush. When I used the airbrush, one of the airplane I kind of regret giving away, because I did such a darn good job on it. The canopy and everything was my P36, or sorry, P35. Is P35 or P36? The predecessor to the P47, and it was all in done in aluminium paint and whatever. And it was just, I thought I'd done so well on it that it just looked so good. I regret getting rid of it, because it was the best model I had done to that point. I made it look so good. It was very simple. It was a 1/4/8 scale. The interior was pretty much all flat black, but the outside was just looked really good. There was like very few colors on it, but I did really good with the decals and everything like that. It was just one of those things that I was very proud of when I was done. And that was one thing that I found from model to model, that when you would finish one, you'd finish a big model, even if it wasn't the nicest looking model, it's you finish something that big. Like the Liberator, I thought was a real. I enjoyed doing the Liberator. That was a big one. That one took me a long time to finish, because I kept running out of paint. It was such a big model. It wasn't huge, but it was big enough, right? And it was a lot of fun. I always found, and most people will find, doing around the canopies is always the hardest, especially on a 1/4/8 scale or something, or smaller. And to do basically the frame around the canopy, like on my Messerschmitt and stuff like that, without getting a drop of paint on the windscreen, very, very, very challenging. So when you do that, you're like, like you're so tense at it, working at it. It's definitely makes it for a interesting thing, and that's what keeps you entertained, is the challenge, right? So if you're going to work in 1/72 scale just to get going, it's harder to get more detailed. The smaller you get, the harder the details become, because like you will literally be painting things with needles and toothpicks to do the detailing. It really is that tricky. But the model goes together faster, because there's usually, maybe there might be like 20 parts to the model, or 30 parts to the model, or even less, maybe 10 or 15. So you can put the things together very quickly. 1/4/8 scale, you get a lot more detail. 1/24 scale, you can learn how to put it pretty much the basic pieces of a car engine. And that's the other thing too, is you learn mechanical reasoning when you start putting these things together. But start small, work your way up. If I start doing a model series, I'll definitely film it and whatever, and do all that, and maybe, just maybe, people will be interested in it. There does seem to be a bit of a market for it, but like anything, I'll see what I do. But it was just a video. I started looking at it again, and just like, oh geez, I'd like to do those things again. And there's a couple I'd like to, like, again, hunt down those model kits that I did before and see what I could do with them now, and make them look really, really spectacular. And then I don't know what you do with them. Some people actually make model kits and then sell the model kit off later on, and they make money on it, and that's how they fund newer model kits. Because there's some people, like, they would love to make the model kit, but they don't have the time to make it, nor the patience, nor the skills, but they would buy it gladly if it was all finished. Some of the hobby stores I used to go to, they would always have a display case, and it was always good marketing, whatever. They would get like a display of the week or display of the month or whatever, where some of the more local and more frequent customers that were there all the time, they would have like a little competition, and they'd vote on who did the best series of jets or series of cars or series of boats or whatever, and they would bring them in and they would showcase somebody's art, these artworks for XYZ amount of time, and always you would hear people, are those for sale, are those for sale? It's like, you got a guy who wants to build the model, and he looks at, oh, I'll just buy that one, like, that just looks so realistic, it looks so good. Oh wow, who did that? How did they do that? Wow, that type of thing. And next thing you know, like, it would give the store the upsale, right? It was pretty cool. And you would try to figure out how they did that and what little tricks they used and stuff like that. So, like, again, the sky's the limit with this, but just getting into it, again, keep it simple. Keep it as basic as you can, just to see if you like it. Because if you don't finish the project, again, there's no use buying a whole bunch of stuff you're not going to do. Again, I got ahead of myself, and it's like, wow, I had something like 5 or 8 kits just sitting there, and I'm like, okay, I'm never going to finish these things. You know what I mean? Like, I'm just never going to finish them. So I ended up donated a whole bunch into Toy Mount and that type of thing. It's getting close to Christmas again. Now we're still in November, but that was the kind of things I did, and I don't regret that at all. But I was like, it would have been nice to finish them, but I just kind of I had them for a decade and I wasn't doing them. So now I'm kind of getting that bug again, that the winter's starting to set in, and you do kind of get a bit bored, and sometimes it's nice to have an ongoing project. Again, you take the whole winter to build one model. You do like 2 pieces a day, that type of thing. Okay, well, it's good enough. Paint this piece, let it sit and dry for a day, whatever, and then throw it on, all that stuff. And yeah. So there's so many ways to do it. So if you stuck with this video this long, I'll be very surprised. But I do like to inspire people to do things. It was something I really enjoyed doing, and hopefully I'll enjoy doing again. I never did do any tanks. I did, like I say, I didn't do very many boats. I think I only did the 2. But the boat I did do, again, the Jolly Roger was definitely a lot of work. I did a lot of airplanes, mostly airplanes. I did a handful of cars. Did, I think, 1 airliner, that type of thing. And I don't think I did any tanks or anything. I don't think no, I did a helicopter, but I never did a tank. Yeah, I don't think I ever did. I'd like to do something in each category, just to to see how it goes and stuff like that. But anyway, I guess I'll leave it at that. So anyway, yeah, good luck getting into it, and if you do, again, maybe you could share some of your work too, and if you want to link down below, hey, I made this model, link it down below. I mean, everybody likes to see this stuff anyway. If you want to show tips and tricks, again, just throw it all in the links, or all in the comments down there. Everybody likes that kind of stuff. next to that, yeah, I guess I'll just leave it at that. So have yourselves a great day, and yeah, there we go. Have a great day.